Sarah Martinez had polished thousands of rifles in silence. For 4 years at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, she worked alone in the weapons maintenance bay, her hands moving with practiced precision over metal and wood, while elite SEAL candidates trained just beyond the walls. They knew her only as the quiet woman who made their weapons gleam, never suspecting the truth hidden beneath her rolled sleeves. But when Petty Officer Webb's cruelty pushed too far during a particularly brutal training cycle, and her shirt sleeve caught on a rifle sling, everything changed. The intricate tattoo that emerged told a story no one expected: 27 precise hash marks running down her forearm, each one representing a confirmed kill in the mountains of Afghanistan. The simple maintenance worker they had ignored. Every day was someone far more dangerous than any of them had ever imagined. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The California morning fog rolls in from the Pacific like a gray blanket, settling over Naval Amphibious Base Coronado with the weight of countless stories. Building 14 sits apart from the main training facilities, a nondescript concrete structure where the most critical work happens away from prying eyes. Inside, the weapons maintenance facility hums with quiet efficiency, fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across rows of weapon racks and maintenance stations. Sarah Martinez arrives at 0530 hours, 30 minutes before anyone else sets foot in the building. Her beaten Honda Accord coughs to a stop in the far corner of the parking lot, as far from the entrance as possible. At 32, she moves with the economy of someone who has learned that attention is dangerous. Her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, work clothes chosen for function over form. The security guard at the entrance barely glances up from his newspaper as she badges in, their interaction limited to a brief nod that acknowledges 4 years of the same routine. The maintenance bay is Sarah's domain, a sterile world of gun, oil and metal where precision matters more than conversation. She flows through her morning inspection with mechanical thoroughness, checking inventory logs, testing cleaning equipment, ensuring every tool is exactly where it should be. Her movements carry an unusual grace, hands that seem to understand the weight and balance of weapons in ways that go beyond simple maintenance training. Sarah pulls the first rifle from the overnight queue, MK-18, that has seen hard use during the previous day's urban warfare exercises. Sand particles cling to the receiver, salt residue from ocean spray marks the barrel, and the trigger mechanism shows signs of heavy firing. She breaks down the weapon with fluid motions, each component placed in exact sequence on her workbench. Her fingers find problems that others miss, microscopic wear patterns that could cause malfunctions, stress points that need attention before they become failures. The early morning solitude wraps around her like armor. No voices demanding explanations, no eyes measuring her worth, just the honest language of metal and mechanisms. Sarah runs a cleaning rod through the barrel, feeling for roughness that shouldn't exist. Her touch identifies a slight imperfection in the rifling, a tiny flaw that would affect accuracy at long range. She makes a note on the maintenance log, flagging the weapon for barrel replacement. As she works, muscle memory guides her hands through procedures that go far deeper than her official training. The way she manipulates the bolt carrier group speaks of thousands of hours behind similar weapons, the kind of familiarity that only comes from life or death reliance on mechanical perfection. But these are thoughts she keeps buried, locked away with so many other things that belong to a different person in a different life. Captain James Mitchell arrives at 0630, his footsteps echoing in the corridor before he appears in the doorway of her work area. A career officer with 23 years of service, Mitchell has learned to recognize competence in all its forms. His eyes take in Sarah's organized workspace, the neat arrangement of disassembled weapons, the meticulous attention to detail that sets her apart from every other maintenance specialist on base. "Good morning, Martinez," he says, his tone carrying genuine respect rather than mere courtesy. "How are we looking for today's exercises?" Sarah glances up briefly before returning to her work. "Everything's on schedule, sir. 18 rifles completed overnight, 43 more in the queue." She gestures toward a clipboard where she has documented every repair, replacement, and modification with surgical precision. The Mk-18s from yesterday's beach assault training needed extra attention. Saltwater corrosion was more extensive than reported. Mitchell nods, impressed despite himself by her thoroughness. The SEAL candidates going through basic underwater demolition training are notoriously hard on equipment, but Sarah somehow keeps their weapons functioning at peak performance. He has seen maintenance specialists with decades of experience who cannot match her consistency. "Any concerns I need to know about?" he asks, genuinely interested in her assessment. 3 weapons need barrel replacements, 2 require new firing pins, and 1 has a trigger group that should be completely rebuilt. Sarah's voice carries the confidence of someone who knows weapons inside and out. "I can have temporary repairs ready for training, but proper fixes will take 48 hours if we want to maintain accuracy standards." Mitchell makes notes on his tablet, struck once again by how Sarah manages to identify problems that escape others entirely. In 4 years, not a single weapon she has maintained has failed during critical exercises, a record that speaks to abilities far beyond her official qualifications. "Outstanding work as always, Martinez," he says, meaning it. "The trainees are lucky to have someone with your attention to detail, keeping their gear operational." Sarah acknowledges the praise with a slight nod, already turning back to her work as Mitchell continues his rounds. She prefers praise to be brief and professional, recognition that doesn't invite curiosity about backgrounds or capabilities. The less people wonder about her skills, the safer her carefully constructed invisibility remains. By 0800 hours, the base comes alive with the controlled chaos of military training. SEAL candidates flood into the gear issue areas, their voices echoing through the corridors as they prepare for another day of pushing human limits. Sarah continues her work in the maintenance bay, insulated from their energy by concrete walls and deliberate routine. She can hear their conversations through the ventilation system, fragments of bravado and nervousness that remind her of other young warriors in other places. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The first weapons returned from morning physical training exercises arrive by 0930, carried by exhausted candidates who have spent hours crawling through sand and surf with their rifles. Sarah processes each weapon methodically, noting the specific abuse each has endured and tailoring her cleaning approach accordingly. Sand requires different techniques than mud. Salt water demands more aggressive treatment than fresh water, and the combination of both creates cleaning challenges that test even experienced armorer skills. Lieutenant Emma Rodriguez appears in the maintenance bay doorway, her uniform still damp from ocean spray and her face showing the exhaustion that comes with SEAL training. At 26, Rodriguez represents a new generation of female officers breaking barriers in special operations, but her presence in Sarah's workspace is unusual. Most officers send enlisted personnel to handle weapons maintenance, maintaining distance from what they consider support functions. "Excuse me," Rodriguez says, her voice carrying both authority and uncertainty. "I wanted to personally check on my rifle. It took a pretty hard impact during surf passage this morning." Sarah looks up from her current project, noting the lieutenant's genuine concern for her equipment rather than mere procedural compliance. She walks to the weapons rack and pulls Rodriguez's Mk-18, quickly field stripping it to assess damage. Her hands move with practiced efficiency, checking critical components for stress fractures or alignment issues. The receiver absorbed most of the impact, Sarah reports after a thorough inspection. Some cosmetic damage to the stock, but all critical. Components are within specifications. She reassembles the weapon with smooth motions that speak of deep familiarity. I would recommend a complete cleaning after today's exercises, but it is fully operational. Rodriguez watches Sarah's hands work, impressed by the speed and confidence of her movements. Thank you for taking the time to check personally. Most maintenance staff would have just signed off on the paperwork. Equipment failures cost lives. Sarah responds simply, handing back the rifle. Your weapon deserves better than paperwork accuracy. The lieutenant accepts her rifle with newfound respect, recognizing something in Sarah's manner that goes beyond standard maintenance protocols. There is an edge to her professionalism, an understanding of weapons that seems rooted in operational experience rather than technical training. But before Rodriguez can pursue the impression, Sarah has already turned back to her workbench, the moment of connection closing as quickly as it opened. The morning progresses with steady rhythm, weapons flowing in and out of the maintenance bay as training exercises continue across the base. Sarah works alone, her workspace arranged for maximum efficiency and minimum distraction. She has perfected the art of productive invisibility, present enough to perform her duties flawlessly, but unremarkable enough to avoid unwanted attention. At 1100 hours, the atmosphere in Building 14 shifts as Petty Officer Webb enters with his usual swagger. Webb represents everything Sarah has learned to avoid in military environments, a combination of genuine skill, overconfidence, and the kind of arrogance that comes from succeeding in elite units. At 29, he has completed 2 deployments with SEAL Team 5 and carries himself with the assurance of someone accustomed to being the most dangerous person in any room. Webb approaches the weapons issue counter with his usual demanding tone, addressing the young sailor manning the station. I need my rifle back now. We have advanced marksmanship in 20 minutes, and I am not dealing with substandard equipment. The sailor checks his log nervously, aware of Webb's reputation for explosive anger when things do not go his way. Sir, your weapon is still in maintenance. Should be ready within the hour. Within the hour is not now, Webb snaps, his voice carrying. Across the facility. Where exactly is my rifle, and who is responsible for the delay? Sarah continues working at her station, deliberately avoiding eye contact as Webb's frustration escalates. She can hear the familiar pattern of a bully seeking targets for his anger, the kind of personality that thrives on making others feel small. Her hands remain steady on the rifle she is cleaning, muscle memory guiding her movements while her mind calculates exit strategies and defensive positions. The young sailor points toward the maintenance bay, his discomfort obvious. The maintenance specialist is working on it now, sir. Sarah Martinez has been handling the advanced weapon repairs. Webb turns his attention towards Sarah's work area, his expression shifting from general irritation to focused contempt. He strides across the bay with the aggressive confidence of someone used to intimidating others into compliance. Sarah keeps her head down, continuing her work while tracking his approach through peripheral vision. Martinez, Webb calls out, his tone carrying clear authority despite having no official rank over her. What is taking so long with my rifle? The paperwork shows it came in 2 hours ago. Sarah glances up briefly, noting Webb's aggressive posture and the way his presence seems to fill her workspace. Your trigger group needed complete disassembly and cleaning, she responds calmly. Sand infiltration was extensive enough to cause potential timing issues. Timing issues, Webb repeats mockingly. My rifle worked fine yesterday. Maybe the problem is maintenance personnel who do not understand high-performance weapons. The insult hangs in the air between them, carefully crafted to question both her competence and her right to work on weapons used by elite operators. Sarah continues her work, refusing to be drawn into an argument that can only end badly for her. She has learned that responding to provocation often makes situations worse, especially when dealing with men like Webb who feed on conflict. "Your rifle will be ready in 15 minutes, she says evenly, focusing on the weapon components spread across her workbench. "All functions will be within specifications." 15 minutes, Webb says, his voice rising slightly. "Do you understand that I have training to complete? That my schedule does not revolve around maintenance delays caused by incompetent support staff?" Sarah's hands pause momentarily on the trigger assembly she is examining, a reaction so subtle that anyone not watching closely would miss it entirely. But something flickers behind her eyes, a hardness that suggests depths Webb has not begun to understand. The moment passes quickly, her professional mask sliding back into place as she continues her work. "I understand that weapon malfunctions during training can compromise mission success," she responds quietly. "That is why proper maintenance cannot be rushed." The response is perfectly professional, technically correct, and delivered in a tone that gives Webb no excuse for further escalation. But her competence seems to irritate him more than open defiance would have, his ego demanding submission rather than quiet professionalism. 4 years of this, Webb mutters, loudly enough for others to hear. Support personnel who think they know better than operators. Maybe if certain people spent less time polishing rifles and more time understanding how they are actually used, we would have better results. The comment draws attention from other personnel in the facility, creating an audience for Webb's performance. Sarah recognizes the dynamic immediately, understanding that this has moved beyond simple impatience into public humiliation. She keeps working, hoping that ignoring the provocation will cause Webb to lose interest and move on to easier targets. But Webb senses vulnerability and presses his advantage, his voice carrying clearly across the maintenance bay. "Some people just are not cut out for supporting real operators. Too concerned with paperwork and procedures to understand what matters in the field." Sarah finishes reassembling Webb's rifle, her movements precise despite the growing tension in the room. She performs a final function check, ensuring that every mechanism operates smoothly before setting the weapon aside. Her hands remain steady, but those watching closely might notice the slight tension in her shoulders, the way her breathing has become more controlled. "Your rifle is ready," she announces, standing to place the weapon on the counter between them. "All systems are operational and within specifications." Webb picks up his rifle with theatrical skepticism, making a show of examining her work for flaws. His inspection is thorough enough to demonstrate his knowledge, but pointed enough to suggest that he expects to find problems. When he finds none, his expression darkens further, as if Sarah's competence is somehow an insult to his authority. "This will have to do," he says dismissively, slinging the rifle across his shoulder. "But in the future, I expect priority service. Some of us have real missions to prepare for." As Webb turns to leave, his rifle sling catches on the edge of Sarah's rolled sleeve, pulling the fabric upward and exposing several inches of her forearm. The motion is quick and unexpected, lasting only a few seconds before Sarah tugs her sleeve back into place. But in those brief moments, several people in the maintenance bay catch a glimpse of something that changes everything. Intricate black lines run down Sarah's exposed forearm, organized in precise groups that form an unmistakable pattern. 27 individual hash marks, each one carefully inked and perfectly aligned, creating a record that tells a story none of them expected. The tattoo disappears as quickly as it appeared, hidden again beneath her sleeve, but the image burns in the minds of those who saw it. Webb freezes mid-stride, his expression shifting from contempt to confusion as his brain processes what he glimpsed. Around the maintenance bay, conversations stop and work pauses as people try to understand what they have just witnessed. Sarah stands perfectly still, her face showing no emotion while her mind calculates the implications of her exposure. Lieutenant Rodriguez, still present from her earlier weapon check, stares at Sarah with new understanding dawning in her eyes. Master Chief Sullivan, who had been reviewing maintenance logs nearby, takes a step closer, his experienced gaze taking in details that others might miss. The silence stretches uncomfortably as everyone tries to reconcile the quiet maintenance worker they know with the implications of what they have seen. Webb recovers first, his voice uncertain for the first time since entering the facility. "What exactly was that on your arm, Martinez?" Sarah meets his gaze directly for the first time during their encounter, her expression calm, but somehow different. Something has shifted in her posture, a subtle straightening that changes her entire presence. The deferential maintenance worker has been replaced by someone harder, more dangerous, though the transformation is so subtle that not everyone notices immediately. "Personal decoration," she responds simply, her tone giving away nothing. But the inadequacy of the explanation hangs in the air, and Webb's expression sharpens as he begins to understand the significance of what he glimpsed. Hash marks arranged in groups of 527 total, placed on the forearm where a soldier could see them while aiming. The implications are unmistakable to anyone with operational experience. "Those looked like kill marks," Webb says, his voice dropping to a more serious tone. Sarah does not confirm or deny the observation, her silence somehow more powerful than any explanation could be. Around the maintenance bay, the atmosphere has changed completely. The simple weapons maintenance worker who polished rifles in anonymity has become someone entirely different, and everyone present understands that they are witnessing something significant. Master Chief Sullivan steps forward, his authority commanding attention from everyone in the room. His 30 years of military experience have taught him to recognize signs that others miss, and the careful way Sarah carries herself suddenly makes perfect sense. He studies her face, looking for confirmation of suspicions that are rapidly becoming certainties. "Martinez," Sullivan says quietly, "what unit were you with before coming to Coronado?" The question hangs in the air like a challenge, offering Sarah a choice between continued concealment and honest revelation. Everyone in the maintenance bay watches her, waiting to see how she will respond to direct questioning from senior leadership. The moment stretches uncomfortably as Sarah weighs options that will determine whether her carefully constructed invisibility can survive this exposure. "Marine Force Reconnaissance," she answers finally, her voice steady despite the significance of the admission. "2nd Battalion, attached to Joint Special Operations Task Force Afghanistan." The revelation hits the room like a physical force. Marine Force Recon represents some of the most elite warriors in the military, operators trained for the most dangerous missions behind enemy lines. The idea that such a person has been working maintenance at their facility for 4 years without anyone knowing seems impossible, yet the evidence is undeniable. Webb's expression has changed completely, contempt replaced by something approaching respect mixed with disbelief. He stares at Sarah as if seeing her for the first time, trying to reconcile the quiet woman who polished his rifle with the implications of her background. Force Recon operators do not simply fade into maintenance positions without stories that explain the transition. "How many deployments?" Sullivan asks, his tone professional but demanding honesty. 3 tours in Helmand Province, Sarah responds, her military bearing becoming more apparent as the conversation continues. 15 months total in country, operating from Forward Operating Base Granite. The details paint a picture of extensive combat experience in one of the most dangerous areas of Afghanistan. Helmand Province saw some of the heaviest fighting of the war, and operators based at Phobe Granite were regularly involved in the most challenging missions. The idea that someone with such experience has been quietly maintaining weapons while SEAL candidates complained about her work seems surreal. Lieutenant Rodriguez finds her voice first, the implications of Sarah's revelation overwhelming her initial shock. 27 confirmed kills? The question comes out as barely more than a whisper. Sarah nods once, a simple acknowledgement that carries enormous weight. Those hash marks represent 27 human lives ended by her actions, each one carefully recorded in the permanent ink that decorates her forearm. The tattoo that she has kept hidden for 4 years tells a story of violence and precision that none of them were prepared to discover. The maintenance bay falls into complete silence. As everyone processes this information, the woman they have taken for granted, dismissed as support personnel, carries a combat record that surpasses most of the operators training at their facility. Her quiet competence with weapons suddenly makes perfect sense, rooted in operational experience rather than technical training. Webb stands frozen, his earlier contempt transformed into something approaching awe. He realizes that he has spent the last several minutes insulting someone who has seen more combat and taken more lives than he ever will. The warrior he was trying to intimidate has been hiding in plain sight, polishing rifles with the same hands that once delivered precision death in the mountains of Afghanistan. "Why?" Master Chief Sullivan asks simply. "Why are you here, maintaining weapons instead of using them?" The question cuts to the heart of the mystery that now surrounds Sarah Martinez. Elite operators do not typically transition to maintenance roles without compelling reasons, and her obvious competence makes the choice even more puzzling. Everyone in the room waits for an explanation that might help them understand how such a person ended up in their midst. Sarah looks around the maintenance bay, taking in the faces of people who will never see her the same way again. Her carefully constructed invisibility has been shattered, and there is no returning to the anonymous existence she has maintained for 4 years. The choice now is between continued deception and honest explanation of the path that brought her to this moment. "Some wars follow you home," she says finally, her voice carrying depths of meaning that hint at stories too complex for simple explanation. "Sometimes the best thing a warrior can do is find a different way to serve." The response raises more questions than it answers, but something in her tone suggests that further inquiry would be unwelcome. The pain underlying her words hints at experiences that go beyond simple combat fatigue, traumas that drove her to seek refuge in the mechanical simplicity of weapons maintenance. As the implications of Sarah's revelation continue to settle over the room, it becomes clear that nothing will ever be quite the same again. The invisible woman who polished rifles has been revealed as someone far more complex and dangerous than anyone imagined, and the questions raised by her exposure will not be easily resolved. The morning after Sarah's tattoo exposure, Building 14 carried a different energy entirely. Word had spread through the base with the speed that only military gossip could achieve, transforming the quiet maintenance specialist into the subject of whispered conversations and curious glances. Personnel who had never bothered to learn. Her name now found excuses to walk past the weapons maintenance bay, hoping to catch another glimpse of the woman whose forearm told such an unexpected story. Sarah arrived at her usual time, but the familiar comfort of anonymity had evaporated overnight. The security guard who had ignored her for 4 years now studied her face with new interest, his casual nod replaced by something approaching respect. The change in his demeanor spoke volumes about how quickly perception could shift when hidden truths emerged into daylight. Inside the maintenance bay, Sarah moved through her morning routine with mechanical precision, but every gesture carried new weight under the scrutiny she could feel even when alone. Her rolled sleeves remained carefully positioned to conceal the tattoo that had changed everything, but the damage was already done. The invisible woman had become visible, and there was no returning to the shadows that had protected her for so long. Captain Mitchell arrived earlier than usual, his expression thoughtful as he entered the maintenance area. The previous day's revelation had clearly occupied his thoughts overnight, and Sarah could see questions forming behind his professional composure. He watched her work for several minutes before speaking, studying the woman he thought he had known while trying to reconcile her background with her chosen role. "Martinez," he said finally, his tone carefully neutral. "I had some interesting conversations yesterday after you left. Seems your service record contains some details that weren't in your initial personnel file." Sarah continued cleaning the rifle in her hands, her movements steady despite the tension building in the room. Personnel files often contained gaps. When it came to classified operations, and she had hoped those gaps would remain undisturbed. The tattoo exposure had apparently prompted deeper investigation into her background, bringing unwanted attention to chapters of her life she preferred to keep closed. My DD-214 reflects all required service information, she responded evenly, referencing the discharge document that officially recorded military service. Everything else falls under operational security protocols. Mitchell nodded slowly, understanding the distinction between public record and classified details. But his expression suggested that official documents told only part of Sarah's story, and the visible evidence on her arm hinted at experiences that went far beyond standard service. Records. I made some calls to contacts at Camp Pendleton, he continued, his voice dropping to ensure privacy. Asked about Marine Force recon operations in Helmand Province during your deployment window. Interesting things came up about a sniper attached to Joint Special Operations Task Force missions. The words hung between them like an accusation disguised as curiosity. Sarah's hands stilled momentarily on the weapon she was servicing, a reaction so brief that someone not watching closely might have missed it entirely. But Mitchell was watching closely, and the pause told him that his inquiries had struck close to something significant. Force recon snipers often work independently, Sarah said carefully. Mission details remain classified regardless of time elapsed. Indeed they do, Mitchell agreed. But results sometimes become part of official records, especially when they involve significant tactical successes. Operation Desert Falcon, for instance, generated quite a bit of documentation about precision shooting that saved American lives. The operation name struck Sarah like a physical blow, though she managed to keep her expression neutral. Desert Falcon represented the culmination of her military career, a mission that had demonstrated her lethal precision while simultaneously destroying her ability to continue serving. The memories associated with that name had driven her into the anonymous safety of weapons maintenance, seeking refuge from the complexity of moral decisions that came with pulling triggers. That operation is still classified, she said quietly, her voice carrying undertones that suggested the conversation was moving into dangerous territory. The tactical details are, Mitchell acknowledged, but the outcome is part of historical record. Terrorist cell neutralized, hostage rescue successful. No American casualties. Someone with exceptional shooting skills made that possible. Sarah returned to her work with deliberate focus, hoping that professional activity might provide shelter from questions that cut too close to painful truths. But Mitchell's persistent inquiry suggested that her exposure had triggered official interest in her background, potentially threatening the careful balance she had maintained between her past and present identities. Sir, with respect, I prefer to focus on current responsibilities rather than previous assignments, she said, her tone carrying finality that discouraged further questions. Mitchell studied her for a long moment, recognizing the boundary she was attempting to establish. As a career officer, he understood the weight that certain memories could carry, and the reasons why exceptional warriors sometimes sought simpler paths. But as the commanding officer responsible for training programs, he also recognized that Sarah's skills might serve purposes beyond weapons maintenance. Understood, Martinez, he said finally. But if circumstances arise where your experience might benefit current operations, I hope you would consider sharing that expertise. The suggestion carried implications that Sarah found deeply uncomfortable. The idea of returning to operational roles, even in advisory capacities, threatened the carefully constructed distance she had placed between herself and the violence that had once defined her existence. The maintenance bay represented safety, a place where her competence could serve useful purposes without crossing lines she was no longer willing to cross. I appreciate the confidence, sir, but I believe I serve best in my current capacity, she responded diplomatically. As Mitchell departed, Sarah sensed that her revelation had initiated processes beyond her control. The military rarely allowed exceptional capabilities to remain unused indefinitely, and her demonstrated skills created expectations that might prove difficult to deflect. The tattoo that had remained hidden for 4 years had become a catalyst for changes she was not prepared to embrace. The morning progressed with unusual activity in the maintenance bay. Personnel who typically dropped off weapons and departed quickly now lingered, attempting casual conversations that probed for details about her background. Sarah deflected their curiosity with professional politeness, but the constant attention wore at her composure like water-eroding stone. Lieutenant Rodriguez appeared during the mid-morning weapon exchange, her demeanor noticeably different from their previous interactions. The young officer's earlier respect had evolved into something approaching awe, tinged with curiosity about experiences she could barely imagine. Rodriguez approached Sarah's workstation with careful deference, clearly struggling with how to address someone whose background exceeded her own, despite lower rank. "Good morning, Martinez," she said formally. "I wanted to personally thank you for the exceptional maintenance work on my weapon. Your attention to detail is remarkable." The thanks were genuine, but Sarah recognized the underlying fishing expedition. Rodriguez was hoping to prompt conversation that might reveal additional details about her military experience, joining the growing list of people whose curiosity had been piqued by the previous day's revelation. Standard maintenance protocols. "Sir," Sarah replied neutrally. "Your weapon receives the same attention as all others." "Of course," Rodriguez agreed quickly. "I just meant that your expertise shows in the results. It must come from extensive experience with these weapon systems." The probe was delicately delivered but unmistakable in its intent. Sarah continued working while considering her response, aware that every conversation now carried potential for further exposure. The lieutenant's genuine admiration made deflection more difficult than dealing with Webb's hostility, but the outcome could be equally problematic. 4 years of maintenance work provides adequate familiarity with standard weapon systems, Sarah said carefully, offering explanation that revealed nothing about her operational background. Rodriguez nodded, clearly disappointed by the non-committal response but unwilling to push harder given the differences in their positions. She accepted her serviced weapon and departed, but Sarah could feel the weight of unasked questions lingering in the air between them. The lunch hour brought Master Chief Sullivan to the maintenance bay, his presence commanding immediate attention from everyone present. At 51, Sullivan carried the authority that came with 3 decades of military experience, including multiple deployments in various conflict zones. His weathered face and steady gaze suggested someone who had seen enough combat to recognize its effects in others. "Martinez," he said without preamble, "walk with me." The request carried the weight of an order despite its casual phrasing. Sarah secured her work area and followed Sullivan from the maintenance bay, aware that their departure had drawn attention from other personnel. They walked in silence through corridors that connected Building 14 to the administrative areas, passing training photographs and unit citations that spoke to the base's operational history. Sullivan led her to a small conference room normally used for classified briefings, closing the door behind them before speaking. The privacy suggested that their conversation would cover topics requiring discretion, potentially involving details about her background that had not been discussed openly. "I spent some time last night reviewing your service record," Sullivan began, settling into a chair across from her. "The official version, anyway. Then I made some calls to people who might know about operations that do not appear in standard documentation." Sarah remained standing, her posture professional but tense. The idea that senior personnel were actively investigating her background represented a significant threat to the anonymity she had worked so hard to maintain. Each inquiry brought increased risk that someone would discover details she preferred to keep buried. "Master Chief, my service record speaks for itself," she said carefully. Any classified operations remain governed by appropriate security protocols. Sullivan smiled grimly, recognizing evasion when he encountered it. 30 years in special operations had taught him to read between the lines of official documentation, and Sarah's record contained gaps that suggested involvement in activities requiring exceptional security clearances. "Operation Desert Falcon," he said simply, watching her reaction closely. "Joint Task Force operation in Helmand Province. Successful hostage rescue with 0 American casualties." The mission report mentions precision shooting that eliminated multiple targets at extreme range under difficult conditions. Sarah's expression remained carefully neutral, but Sullivan caught the slight tension in her jaw at the mention of specific operational details. His access to classified information clearly exceeded what she had expected, suggesting that her background was being examined at levels she had not anticipated. "That operation remains classified, Master Chief," she responded, falling back on security protocols as protection against unwanted inquiry. "The tactical details are," Sullivan agreed, "but certain aspects have been declassified for training purposes. The shooting sequence, for instance, has become a case study in precision marksmanship under stress conditions." He opened a folder that had been sitting on the conference table, revealing documents that made Sarah's stomach tighten with recognition. Mission summaries, tactical analyses, and ballistics reports that reduced the most traumatic experience of her military career to data points in training materials. 7 targets eliminated in 4 minutes and 37 seconds. Sullivan continued, reading from the documentation. "Ranges from 400 to 800 meters. All confirmed kills. All precision shots to neutralize armed hostiles without endangering American personnel or civilian hostages." The clinical description stripped away the human complexity of those moments, reducing life and death decisions to statistical achievements. Sarah remembered every detail that the reports failed to capture: the weight of each trigger pull, the faces glimpsed through her scope, the knowledge that hesitation would cost American lives. "The shooting was exceptional," Sullivan said, his tone carrying professional admiration. "But that is not what bothers you about that mission, is it?" The question cut through her defensive barriers with surgical precision, recognizing that technical success could coexist with personal trauma. Sarah's silence confirmed his assessment, acknowledging without words that the mission's tactical victory had come at personal costs that official reports could not quantify. "What happened after the shooting, Martinez?" Sullivan asked gently. "What made you leave Force Recon and end up maintaining weapons instead of using them?" The question hung in the air between them, offering Sarah a choice between continued concealment and honest explanation of the path that had brought her to this moment. Sullivan's tone suggested genuine concern rather than mere curiosity, but answering meant revisiting memories she had spent 4 years trying to forget. "Some missions succeed tactically while failing morally," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Desert Falcon accomplished its objectives, but the cost was higher than anyone anticipated." Sullivan leaned forward slightly, his expression encouraging continued honesty. "Talk to me, Martinez." "What cost?" Sarah looked out the conference room window toward the training areas where SEAL candidates pushed themselves toward excellence, remembering her own journey toward becoming someone capable of taking lives with mechanical precision. The distance between those young warriors and her current position seemed both vast and terrifyingly narrow. "The hostages were a family," she began slowly, her voice carrying the weight of memories that had shaped every day since. "American missionaries, taken by Taliban fighters, held in a compound outside Lashkar Gah. Intelligence indicated imminent execution if rescue was not attempted immediately." Sullivan nodded, familiar with the tactical scenarios that created impossible time pressures and limited options. Hostage rescue operations rarely offered ideal solutions, requiring split-second decisions based on incomplete information and unacceptable alternatives. The compound was heavily defended, Sarah continued, her hands unconsciously clenching as she spoke. 7 armed guards, multiple positions, civilian population nearby. Assault team insertion would have resulted in hostage casualties. Almost certainly. So they sent you to eliminate the guards before the assault, Sullivan said, understanding the tactical logic that had placed such responsibility on her shoulders. Sarah nodded, remembering the weight of her rifle as she took position on a hillside overlooking the target compound. The scope that had magnified faces and revealed details that tactical reports could not capture, transforming distant figures into human beings whose lives would end at her command. 7 shots, 7 kills, she said quietly. Mission accomplished. Exactly as planned. Hostages recovered safely, no American casualties, tactical victory by every measurable standard. But something went wrong afterward, Sullivan observed, recognizing that successful missions did not typically drive elite operators into maintenance roles. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, struggling with explanations that would convey the complexity of emotions that had followed her tactical success. The mission briefings had prepared her for shooting challenges, but not for the discovery that had changed everything about her understanding of what she had done. 3 days later, intelligence analysis revealed additional information about the targets, she said finally. Information that changed the context of everything I had done during that mission. Sullivan waited patiently, understanding that some stories required careful telling to preserve the teller's ability to continue functioning. Sarah's obvious struggle suggested that the revelation had fundamentally altered her relationship with her own capabilities. 2 of the guards were confirmed Taliban fighters, Sarah continued, her voice becoming steadier as she worked through the facts. 2 others were Pakistani nationals with known terrorist connections. But 3 of them were local villagers, farmers who had been coerced into guard duty to protect their own families from Taliban retaliation. The revelation hit Sullivan with its full moral complexity, understanding immediately why such information would devastate someone with Sarah's obvious conscience. The precision that had saved American lives had also ended the lives of men who were themselves victims of the same terrorists holding the hostages. You could not have known, Sullivan said gently. Intelligence failures happen in combat situations. The decision was correct based on available information. Correct tactically, Sarah agreed, her voice carrying undertones of pain that 4 years had not diminished. But those men died because I pulled the trigger, not because they chose to become enemies. Their families lost fathers and sons because I was too good at my job to distinguish between willing combatants and unwilling participants. The weight of her revelation settled over the conference room, explaining the path that had led an elite warrior into the mechanical simplicity of weapons maintenance. Sarah had discovered that exceptional skill could become a moral burden when applied in situations where clear distinctions between right and wrong dissolved into shades of gray. So you left Force Recon, Sullivan said, understanding her choice. Even as he recognized the waste of her capabilities. Came here to maintain weapons instead of using them. Some people are too dangerous for their own good, Sarah replied, unconsciously echoing words she had spoken to others. I learned that precision without perfect intelligence can create more problems than it solves. Sullivan studied her face, seeing the intelligence and moral complexity that had driven her decision to withdraw from operational roles. Her choice represented both personal protection and recognition that certain capabilities carried responsibilities she was no longer willing to accept. But you are still here, he observed. Still serving, still contributing to military readiness in your own way. That suggests you have not given up entirely on using your skills constructively. Sarah considered his words, acknowledging the truth in his assessment. Her 4 years at Coronado had not been simple retreat from responsibility, but rather an attempt to find ways of serving that did not require making life-and-death decisions based on incomplete information. Maintaining weapons serves a purpose, she said. Ensuring that others have reliable equipment when they face those decisions. It feels like contribution without crossing lines I am no longer willing to cross. Sullivan nodded, respecting her choice, while recognizing the careful balance she had constructed between service and self-protection. But his expression suggested that he saw possibilities for her skills that went beyond maintenance work, applications that might honor her moral boundaries, while utilizing her exceptional capabilities. There might be other ways to serve Martinez, he said thoughtfully. Training roles, advisory positions, technical consultation that does not require pulling triggers, but still benefits from your experience and expertise. The suggestion carried implications that Sarah found both appealing and threatening. The idea of sharing her knowledge without returning to operational roles offered potential compromise between her desire to contribute and her need to maintain distance from lethal applications of her skills. I would need to think about that, Master Chief, she said carefully. Any role that involved sharing tactical knowledge would require careful consideration of boundaries and applications. Of course, Sullivan agreed. But consider this. Your experience, properly applied, could help others make better decisions in similar situations. The moral complexity you discovered might prevent others from facing the same ethical dilemmas. As their conversation concluded, Sarah found herself wrestling with possibilities she had not seriously considered since leaving Force Recon. Idea that her painful experience might serve constructive purposes offered potential redemption for the guilt that had driven her into hiding. But it also threatened the carefully maintained distance between her current identity and the warrior she had once been. The afternoon brought Webb back to the maintenance bay, his demeanor noticeably different from his previous aggressive confidence. The previous day's revelation had clearly affected his perception of Sarah, replacing contempt with something approaching cautious respect. He approached her workstation with uncharacteristic deference, struggling to reconcile his earlier behavior with his new understanding of her background. Martinez, he said formally, his tone lacking its usual arrogance. I wanted to apologize for yesterday. My comments were inappropriate and uninformed. Sarah looked up from the rifle she was servicing, noting the genuine discomfort in Webb's expression. His apology represented a significant shift from someone unaccustomed to admitting error, particularly to personnel he considered subordinate in the military hierarchy. Apology accepted, she replied simply, returning to her work without further comment. Webb remained at her workstation, clearly struggling with additional words that needed to be spoken. His earlier mockery had targeted someone whose combat experience far exceeded his own, creating embarrassment that went beyond simple rudeness to questions about his judgment and character. I had no idea about your background, he continued awkwardly. Force Recon, the deployment record, the tattoo. If I had known, you would have treated me differently, Sarah finished for him, her tone carrying neither accusation nor forgiveness. But my background should not determine basic professional courtesy. My work quality speaks for itself regardless of previous assignments. The response carried gentle criticism that highlighted the arbitrary nature of respect based on combat credentials rather than current performance. Webb's apology, while genuine, revealed assumptions about worth and recognition that Sarah found problematic even as she appreciated his attempt to make amends. You are right, Webb acknowledged. Your work has always been exceptional. I should have recognized that from the beginning, regardless of what I knew about your service record. Sarah nodded acceptance of his improved understanding, but her expression suggested that the lesson extended beyond their personal interaction. The military culture that measured worth primarily through combat achievement created hierarchies that often overlooked valuable contributions from those who chose different paths. Is there anything I can do to make up for my behavior? Webb asked, his genuine desire to repair the damage evident in his voice. Treat everyone in this facility with the same respect you would show someone whose background you admire, Sarah replied. Combat experience does not determine a person's value or their right to professional courtesy. The simple request carried profound implications for how Webb approached interactions with support personnel, challenging assumptions about worth based on job classification rather than individual merit. His nod suggested understanding that went beyond their specific situation to broader questions about leadership and character. As Webb departed with his serviced weapon, Sarah reflected on the changes that 24 hours had brought to her carefully constructed existence. The accidental exposure of her tattoo had initiated conversations and revelations that threatened the anonymous safety she had worked so hard to maintain. But it had also created opportunities for connection and contribution that might offer paths forward she had not previously considered. The remainder of the afternoon passed with continued attention from personnel drawn by curiosity about her background, but the nature of their interest had evolved from simple gossip to genuine respect for her service and expertise. Sarah found herself engaged in more substantial conversations about weapons performance and tactical applications, sharing knowledge that felt constructive rather than threatening. As the duty day concluded and the maintenance bay emptied of personnel, Sarah remained at her workstation, processing the implications of her exposure and the possibilities that Sullivan had presented. The tattoo that had remained hidden for 4 years had become a catalyst for examining the balance between past trauma and present purpose, between self-protection and service to others. The choice before her was no longer simply between visibility and anonymity, but between different ways of applying her exceptional capabilities in service of values she still believed in despite the pain they had caused her. The precision that had once taken lives might find redemptive purpose in preserving them, but only if she could find courage to step forward from the shadows that had protected her for so long. The third day after Sarah's exposure brought unexpected visitors to Naval Amphibious Base Coronado. A black SUV with government plates arrived at the main gate during the early morning hours, carrying passengers whose presence suggested that Sarah's revelation had attracted attention from far beyond the local chain of command. The vehicle proceeded directly to the administrative building, bypassing normal visitor protocols in ways that indicated official business of considerable importance. Sarah noticed the unusual activity through the maintenance bay windows as she performed her morning equipment checks. Government vehicles were not uncommon at military installations, but the timing and destination of this particular arrival created an uncomfortable feeling in her stomach. 4 years of anonymity had been shattered in less than 72 hours, and now external agencies seemed to be taking interest in her situation. Commander Patricia Hayes arrived at Building 14 within minutes of the SUV's arrival, her expression tense as she sought out Sarah's location. At 47, Hayes commanded respect through 2 decades of naval service that had taken her from surface warfare to special operations support roles. Her presence in the maintenance bay at this early hour suggested urgency that went beyond routine administrative matters. Martinez, Hayes called out as she entered the weapons maintenance area. "I need you to come with me immediately. Bring your identification and be prepared for an extended absence from your normal duties." The formal tone and specific instructions confirmed Sarah's growing concern that her exposure had initiated processes beyond local military interest. She secured her work area with practiced efficiency while her mind calculated potential explanations for official attention that required immediate response and extended absence from routine responsibilities. "Ma'am, is there anything specific I should know about this meeting?" Sarah asked as they walked toward the administrative building. Hayes glanced around to ensure privacy before responding, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "There are people here who want to discuss your previous service record and potential applications for your expertise. I recommend complete honesty in your responses while maintaining appropriate security protocols." The advice carried implications that made Sarah's pulse quicken despite her efforts to remain calm. Official interest in her background suggested that someone had connected her service record to current operational requirements, potentially threatening the careful distance she had maintained between her past capabilities and present responsibilities. They entered a conference room where 3 individuals in civilian clothing waited with folders and laptops that suggested thorough preparation for this meeting. The lead figure, a woman in her early 50s with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority, rose as they entered and extended her hand in greeting. "Sergeant Martinez, I am Deputy Director Catherine Walsh from the Defense Intelligence Agency. These are my colleagues, Mr. James Chun from Special Operations Command and Dr. Lisa Rodriguez from the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. We appreciate you taking time to speak with us on short notice." The introductions confirmed Sarah's worst fears about the scope of official interest in her situation. The presence of representatives from multiple defense agencies suggested that her background had been flagged for purposes that went far beyond routine security reviews or administrative curiosity. "Ma'am, I should point out that I am no longer active-duty military personnel," Sarah responded carefully. "My current position is civilian contractor status for maintenance support services." "We understand your current employment status," Walsh replied smoothly. "Our interest relates to your previous military service and specific expertise that might prove valuable for ongoing national security initiatives." She gestured toward chairs arranged around the conference table, creating an atmosphere of official business that made casual deflection impossible. Sarah took the offered seat while maintaining professional posture that concealed her growing anxiety about the direction this conversation might take. "Your service record indicates exceptional capabilities in precision marksmanship and tactical reconnaissance," Chun began, consulting documents that clearly contained detailed information about her military background. Operation Desert Falcon specifically demonstrated skills that our current programs could benefit from significantly. Sarah felt the familiar tightness in her chest at the mention of the mission that had ended her military career, but she kept her expression neutral while waiting to understand the specific nature of their interest. The presence of DARPA representation suggested technological applications rather than direct operational deployment, but the distinction might prove meaningless in practice. "That operation remains classified," she responded, falling back on security protocols as protection against unwanted disclosure. "The tactical details remain classified," Walsh agreed, "but certain aspects have been approved for discussion in this context. Specifically, your demonstrated ability to engage multiple targets at varying ranges with perfect accuracy under extreme stress conditions." Dr. Rodriguez opened her laptop and turned the screen toward Sarah, displaying what appeared to be technical specifications and performance data related to advanced weapon systems. The complex diagrams and measurement parameters suggested development programs that push the boundaries of current military technology. "We are developing next-generation precision weapon systems that require operator capabilities matching your demonstrated performance levels," Rodriguez explained. "The systems incorporate advanced targeting technology, but human skill remains the critical factor in successful application." Sarah studied the technical information while wrestling with implications that threatened everything she had built since leaving active service. The weapons technology appeared to represent significant advances in accuracy and range capabilities, but the human interface requirements clearly demanded expertise that few operators possessed. "I appreciate the confidence in my abilities, but I am no longer involved in operational activities," she said carefully. "My current role focuses on maintenance and support functions rather than tactical applications." "We understand your current preferences," Chun replied, "but national security requirements sometimes necessitate reconsidering previous decisions about service applications. Your unique capabilities could contribute to programs that protect American lives while minimizing combat exposure." The phrase, Minimize combat exposure carried particular weight given Sarah's reasons for leaving active service. But she recognized the careful phrasing designed to address her concerns, while still requesting participation in activities she had deliberately avoided for 4 years. "What specifically are you asking me to do?" she asked directly, preferring clear understanding to diplomatic ambiguity. Walsh exchanged glances with her colleagues before responding, suggesting that they had anticipated this moment in the conversation and prepared their approach accordingly. The coordination in their presentation indicated extensive planning for this recruitment attempt. "Initially, we would want you to evaluate the weapon systems under controlled conditions and provide feedback on their tactical applications," Walsh explained. "No operational deployment, no combat situations, simply technical assessment of capabilities and limitations." The request sounded reasonable on its surface, but Sarah recognized the incremental approach often used to draw reluctant participants into activities they initially resisted. Technical evaluation could easily evolve into training requirements, and training could progress toward operational applications, despite initial assurances otherwise. "And after the initial evaluation," Sarah asked, pushing for clarity about long-term expectations. "That would depend on your assessment and recommendations," Rodriguez replied diplomatically. "If the systems prove viable, we might request assistance in developing training protocols or operational procedures for future users." The vague timeline and undefined scope of involvement created exactly the kind of open-ended commitment that Sarah had learned to avoid. Her experience with military requests suggested that temporary assignments often became permanent responsibilities, especially when they involved unique capabilities that few others possessed. "I need time to consider this request," she said finally. "The decision involves factors beyond simple professional considerations." "Of course," Walsh agreed readily. "Take whatever time you need. But I should mention that the timeline for this program is somewhat compressed due to operational requirements. We would prefer a decision within the next week if possible." The gentle pressure combined with artificial urgency represented classic negotiation tactics designed to prevent thorough consideration of alternatives. Sarah recognized the approach from her own operational experience, but understanding the technique did not reduce its effectiveness in creating psychological pressure to comply. "I understand the timeline concerns, but I still need to evaluate all implications before making any commitments," she responded firmly. The meeting concluded with exchanges of contact information and assurances of mutual respect for the complexity of Sarah's situation. But the underlying message was clear. Her exceptional capabilities had attracted official attention that would not easily be deflected. The anonymity she had cultivated for 4 years had been permanently compromised. As the government representatives departed, Commander Hayes remained behind to discuss the implications of their visit. Her expression suggested both understanding of Sarah's position and awareness of the pressures that would inevitably follow such official interest in her capabilities. "Martinez, I want you to know that I support whatever decision you make regarding their request," Hayes said quietly. "But I also want you to understand that this probably will not be the last such approach you receive." The warning carried weight that Sarah fully appreciated, recognizing that her exposure had placed her on lists maintained by agencies whose mission sometimes required capabilities like hers. The choice was no longer simply between visibility and anonymity, but between controlled involvement and persistent pressure from multiple sources. "Ma'am, do you have any advice for handling this situation?" Sarah asked, genuinely uncertain about the best path forward. Hayes considered the question carefully before responding, her experience with similar situations evident in her thoughtful approach. "In my experience, people with your background face continuing interest regardless of their preferences. Sometimes limited cooperation on your own terms provides better protection than complete refusal." The perspective offered a pragmatic approach to managing unwanted attention. suggesting that strategic engagement might provide more control than absolute resistance. But it also acknowledged that Sarah's exceptional capabilities created ongoing obligations that could not be permanently avoided. The remainder of the morning passed with unusual tension as word of the government visit spread through Building 14. Personnel who had grown accustomed to the excitement surrounding Sarah's revealed background now sensed that larger forces were taking interest in their colleague's situation, creating an atmosphere of speculation and concern. Lieutenant Rodriguez approached Sarah's workstation during the midday equipment exchange, her expression reflecting the anxiety that many felt about the morning's events. The young officer had developed genuine respect for Sarah over the past several days, and the possibility of losing her expertise to government programs created both personal and professional concerns. "Martinez, I heard about the visitors this morning," Rodriguez said quietly. "I hope everything is all right with your situation here." Sarah appreciated the concern, but recognized the limitations of what she could discuss about official meetings involving classified programs and security clearances. The gap between her colleague's curiosity and her ability to provide explanations created additional isolation at a time when she needed support most. "Official business that requires careful consideration," she replied diplomatically. "Nothing that affects my current responsibilities in the immediate term." The response provided reassurance without revealing details that might compromise security protocols or create additional complications. But Rodriguez's expression suggested that she understood the potential implications of government interest in Sarah's capabilities. "If there is anything we can do to support you through this process, please let us know," Rodriguez offered sincerely. "Your contribution to our training programs has been invaluable, and we would hate to lose that expertise." This sentiment was echoed by other personnel throughout the day as news of the government visit continued to circulate. Sarah found herself receiving expressions of support and concern from colleagues who had previously taken her presence for granted, their newfound appreciation highlighting how much her situation had changed in just a few days. Master Chief Sullivan appeared at her workstation during the late afternoon, his expression suggesting that he had received briefings about the morning's events and their potential implications. His 30 years of experience with government agencies and special operations provided perspective that might prove valuable in Sarah's decision-making process. "Martinez, I understand you had some interesting visitors today," he said without preamble. "Want to talk through the implications of whatever they proposed?" Sarah glanced around to ensure privacy before responding, aware that discussions of government programs required discretion even in military facilities. Sullivan's security clearance and operational experience made him a valuable sounding board, but the sensitive nature of the morning's conversation limited what she could reveal. They expressed interest in technical consultation for advanced weapon systems development, she said carefully. The kind of work that would utilize previous experience without requiring operational deployment. Sullivan nodded, understanding both the appeal and the dangers of such arrangements. His expression suggested familiarity with similar situations where elite operators were drawn back into service through seemingly limited commitments that gradually expanded into full involvement. Technical consultation has a way of evolving into training requirements, and training requirements often lead to operational applications, he observed. Especially when the expertise being consulted is as rare as yours appears to be. The warning echoed Sarah's own concerns about the incremental nature of government requests, but Sullivan's experience provided additional credibility to worries that might otherwise seem paranoid. His understanding of how such programs operated offered valuable perspective on potential long-term implications. "That is exactly what concerns me about their proposal," Sarah admitted. "The initial request sounds reasonable, but I have seen how temporary assignments become permanent responsibilities when they involve capabilities that few people possess." Sullivan leaned against her workbench, his posture suggesting a longer conversation about topics that required careful consideration. His willingness to discuss such sensitive matters indicated both trust in her judgment and concern about the pressures she was facing. On the other hand, he continued thoughtfully, complete resistance to such requests often generates more pressure than strategic cooperation. Sometimes limited involvement on your own terms provides better protection than absolute refusal. The advice aligned with Commander Hayes's earlier suggestion, offering a pragmatic approach to managing unwanted attention that acknowledged the realities of government persistence in pursuing valuable capabilities. But it also required Sarah to consider forms of involvement she had spent 4 years avoiding. The question becomes whether I can maintain meaningful boundaries once I start down that path, Sarah said, articulating her primary concern about any form of cooperation with government programs. That depends partly on how you structure your involvement and partly on your ability to recognize when boundaries are being crossed, Sullivan replied. But it also depends on having support systems that help you maintain perspective during the process. The mention of support systems highlighted another aspect of Sarah's situation that complicated her decision-making. 4 years of deliberate isolation had left her without the personal relationships that might provide guidance and accountability during a process that threatened to draw her back into activities she had deliberately abandoned. I have been managing on my own for quite some time, she said quietly. Not sure I have the kind of support network you are describing. Maybe it is time to start building one, Sullivan suggested gently. The challenges you are facing are not the kind that should be handled in isolation, especially when they involve pressures from multiple government agencies. The conversation continued as they discussed practical approaches to managing official interest while maintaining personal boundaries. But Sarah found herself struggling with fundamental questions about her future direction. The exposure that had begun with an accidental tattoo revelation was forcing decisions she had avoided for 4 years. As the duty day concluded and the maintenance bay emptied of personnel, Sarah remained at her workstation wrestling with choices that would determine the trajectory of her life going forward. The government representatives would expect an answer within a week, but the implications of either acceptance or refusal extended far beyond the immediate decision. Her telephone rang, interrupting her contemplation with a call that would add another dimension to her already complex situation. The voice on the other end identified himself as Colonel Marcus Thompson from Marine Corps Special Operations Command, speaking with the authority of someone accustomed to having his calls returned immediately. Sergeant Martinez, I apologize for calling you directly, but I wanted to discuss a matter that requires some discretion, Thompson began. I understand you have been approached by other agencies regarding potential consultation work. The call confirmed Sarah's growing realization that her exposure had attracted attention from multiple sources within the defense establishment, each with their own interests in her capabilities. The competition between agencies for her expertise created additional pressure, while potentially providing leverage in negotiations. Yes, sir, I have received one such approach, she replied carefully, uncertain about how much information she should reveal about ongoing discussions with other government representatives. I wanted you to know that Marine Corps has its own programs that might benefit from your expertise, Thompson continued. Programs that might offer more flexibility in terms of involvement levels and operational requirements than other agencies typically provide. The competing offer created exactly the kind of situation Sarah had hoped to avoid, with multiple government entities seeking to secure her cooperation for their respective programs. The choice was no longer simply between involvement and refusal, but between different forms of service that carried distinct implications and requirements. Colonel, I appreciate the interest, but I am still evaluating my options regarding any form of government consultation work, she said diplomatically. Of course, Thompson replied. But I wanted to ensure you understood all available alternatives before making any commitments elsewhere. Sometimes the Marines can offer arrangements that provide better work-life balance than other service branches or agencies. The phrase work-life balance suggested understanding of her concerns about maintaining personal boundaries while utilizing her professional capabilities. But Sarah recognized a careful marketing language designed to make military involvement seem more appealing than civilian agency work. "Sir, if you could provide written information about potential opportunities, I would be happy to include that in my evaluation process," she said, buying time while gathering information about her options. "Absolutely," Thompson agreed readily. "I will have a packet delivered to you tomorrow morning that outlines several possible arrangements. No pressure, just information to help you make an informed decision." As the call ended, Sarah found herself facing a situation that had grown far more complex than she had anticipated when her tattoo was accidentally exposed 3 days earlier. Multiple government entities were competing for her expertise, each offering different approaches to utilizing her capabilities while claiming to respect her boundaries and concerns. The evening brought solitude that allowed deeper contemplation of her situation, but the complexity of her choices made clear decision-making increasingly difficult. Each option carried distinct advantages and disadvantages, but all of them threatened the carefully constructed distance she had maintained between her current identity and her former capabilities. Sarah drove home to her small apartment near the base, passing the familiar landmarks that had provided stability during 4 years of quiet anonymity. The routine that had once offered comfort now seemed fragile, threatened by forces that had been set in motion by a moment of accidental exposure. Her apartment reflected the same careful simplicity that characterized her professional life, furnished with functional items that served practical purposes without drawing attention or revealing personal information. The walls held no photographs or mementos that might provide insight into her background, maintaining the same protective anonymity that had governed her public persona. But that anonymity had been permanently compromised, and the choices facing her would determine whether she could construct a new balance between service and self-protection, or whether the forces now interested in her capabilities would ultimately draw her back into activities she had spent 4 years trying to forget. The tattoo that had remained hidden for so long had become a catalyst for changes that extended far beyond her immediate circumstances, forcing decisions about identity, purpose, and the proper application of exceptional capabilities that carried both tremendous potential for good and devastating capacity for personal destruction. The simple maintenance worker who polished rifles had become a person of interest to multiple government agencies, and the path forward was anything but clear. Sarah spent the weekend in careful deliberation, reviewing the materials that had arrived from both the Defense Intelligence Agency and Marine Corps' Special Operations Command. The competing proposals spread across her kitchen table represented fundamentally different approaches to utilizing her expertise, each carrying distinct implications for the life she had built since leaving active service. The DIA package emphasized cutting-edge technology development and the opportunity to shape next-generation weapon systems that could revolutionize precision engagement capabilities. Their materials included technical specifications that pushed the boundaries of current ballistic science, incorporating advanced targeting systems and projectile technologies that promised accuracy levels previously thought impossible. The work would be conducted at secure facilities away from operational environments, focusing purely on technical development without direct combat applications. The Marine Corps' proposal took a different approach, emphasizing training and doctrine development that would help future operators avoid the moral complexities that had driven Sarah from active service. Their program focused on developing engagement protocols that prioritize target identification and civilian protection, incorporating lessons learned from operations like Desert Falcon to prevent similar tragedies in future missions. Both offers acknowledged her concerns about operational deployment, and promised involvement limited to advisory and technical roles. But Sarah's experience with military commitments made her skeptical of such assurances, understanding how easily temporary assignments could evolve into permanent responsibilities when they involved capabilities that few others possessed. Monday morning brought resolution in an unexpected form. Sarah arrived at Building 14 to find Webb waiting near her workstation, his expression carrying a seriousness that suggested important news rather than routine interaction. His transformation from antagonist to respectful colleague had continued over the past week, but his presence this early indicated something beyond normal courtesy. "Martinez," he said as she approached, "I wanted to speak with you before the others arrived. I heard about the government visits last week, and I have some information that might affect your decision-making process." Sarah paused in her mourning routine, surprised that Webb would involve himself in her personal situation. His insight into government programs was limited by his operational focus, but his genuine concern suggested that he had discovered something worth sharing despite the boundaries of security classifications. "What kind of information?" she asked, cautiously, uncertain about the source or reliability of whatever Webb had learned through his channels. "I spoke with some contacts who have worked with both DIA and Marzok on similar programs," Webb explained. "The feedback was mixed, but there were consistent patterns in how these arrangements typically develop over time." He gestured toward the conference room where they could speak privately, indicating that his information required discretion given the sensitive nature of ongoing negotiations. Sarah followed him, curious about perspectives that might illuminate aspects of the competing proposals that official presentations had not revealed. The DIA programs tend to start with pure technical development, but they have a history of evolving toward operational applications once the technology proves viable. Webb began once they were seeded. "The people I spoke with described a gradual shift from laboratory work to field testing to deployment support over periods of 18 to 24 months. The timeline matched Sarah's concerns about incremental involvement, leading toward activities she wanted to avoid. But hearing it confirmed by people with direct experience added credibility to worries that might otherwise seem paranoid. Webb's sources provided insight into program trajectories that official recruiters would be unlikely to discuss. "What about the Marine Corps' option?" she asked, hoping that military programs might offer better boundary protection than civilian agency work. More transparent about eventual expectations, but also more demanding in terms of time commitment. "Travel requirements," Webb replied. "The people I spoke with described extensive TDY assignments to various bases for training development and instructor certification programs. The prospect of extensive travel and temporary duty assignments created additional concerns about work-life balance and the stability Sarah had worked to establish since leaving active service. Both programs seemed to offer legitimate opportunities while carrying risks that could undermine the carefully constructed life she had built. "Is there a third option that anyone mentioned?" Sarah asked, hoping that Webb's research had uncovered alternatives not presented by the official recruiters. "Actually, there is," Webb said, his expression brightening slightly. "Several people mentioned contract work with private defense contractors who handle government projects. Better pay, more flexible schedules, and clearer boundaries about scope of work because everything is defined in legal contracts rather than military orders." The private sector alternative had not occurred to Sarah during her deliberations, but it offered potential advantages that addressed many of her primary concerns. Contract work typically provided clearer definition of responsibilities and limitations, with legal protections that military assignments often lacked. "Do you have any specific recommendations for contractors who might be interested in someone with my background?" she asked, intrigued by possibilities that might offer compromise between service and self-protection. "One can make some introductions, if you are interested," Webb offered. "No commitments, just conversations with people who understand your situation and might have opportunities that fit your requirements better than government programs. The offer represented a significant gesture from someone who had initially treated her with contempt, demonstrating how much their relationship had evolved since her background was revealed. Webb's willingness to use his contacts to help her navigate a complex situation showed genuine respect that went beyond professional courtesy. "I would appreciate those introductions," Sarah said gratefully. "Having more options would definitely help me make a better decision about my future direction." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Master Chief Sullivan, whose expression suggested that he had news of his own to share. His timing indicated coordination rather than coincidence, suggesting that multiple people were working to provide Sarah with information and support during her decision-making process. "Martinez, Webb," Sullivan called out as he approached their location. "Good to see you both here early. I have some updates about your situation that might be relevant to current discussions." He joined them in the conference room, carrying documents that bore official letterhead from multiple military commands. His expression carried the satisfaction of someone who had successfully navigated bureaucratic channels to achieve desired outcomes. "I spent some time last week discussing your situation with contacts throughout the Special Operations community," Sullivan began. "There is significant interest in your expertise, but also recognition that your concerns about boundaries and operational involvement need to be respected." Sarah felt a mixture of appreciation and anxiety about Sullivan's advocacy on her behalf, grateful for support while concerned about the attention such discussions might generate. His efforts to help were clearly well-intentioned, but they also increased visibility at a time when she preferred to maintain low profile. "What kind of interest are we talking about?" she asked, hoping that additional attention would not complicate her decision-making process further. "Several training commands have expressed interest in contract instruction positions that would allow you to share your expertise without returning to operational status," Sullivan explained. The work would involve developing curriculum and conducting specialized classes, but with clear limitations about scope and duration. The training opportunities aligned with suggestions Sarah had received from other sources, offering patterns that indicated legitimate demand for her expertise in educational rather than operational contexts. The consistency across multiple sources suggested that teaching might provide viable compromise between service and personal boundaries. There is also interest from the Naval Special Warfare Development Group in technical consultation for equipment evaluation and modification, Sullivan continued. Similar to what DIA proposed, but with military oversight rather than civilian agency management. The additional option provided another alternative that might offer better protection and clearer accountability than civilian agency programs. But Sarah remained cautious about any arrangement that could evolve beyond defined limitations. Her experience suggested that enthusiasm for her capabilities often led to expanded expectations, regardless of initial agreements. "Master Chief, while I appreciate all the attention my expertise has generated, I am still concerned about maintaining appropriate boundaries regardless of which option I choose," she said honestly. "That is exactly why I wanted to discuss a coordination approach that might address those concerns," Sullivan replied, producing documents that outlined a proposal different from any she had previously considered. Rather than committing to a single program or agency, Sullivan's proposal suggested establishing a consulting arrangement that would allow Sarah to work with multiple organizations on defined projects with clear start and end dates. The approach would provide variety and prevent any single entity from gradually expanding her involvement beyond comfortable levels. The coordination would be handled through a military liaison office that specializes in managing contractor relationships with multiple commands, Sullivan explained. "They have experience with people who have your background and concerns, and they are committed to ensuring that boundaries are respected." The proposal offered creative solution that addressed many of Sarah's primary concerns while still allowing her to contribute her expertise in meaningful ways. The military oversight would provide protection against civilian agency pressure, while the project-based structure would prevent open-ended commitments that might evolve beyond her comfort zone. This sounds like it might provide the balance I have been looking for, Sarah said thoughtfully. Can you arrange for me to speak with representatives from this liaison office? Already done, Sullivan replied with satisfaction. They will be here Wednesday morning to discuss the arrangement and answer any questions you might have about how the process works. As their conversation concluded, Sarah felt the first genuine optimism she had experienced since her tattoo was accidentally exposed the previous week. The possibility of contributing her expertise through carefully structured arrangements offered hope that she might find meaningful service without sacrificing the personal boundaries that protected her mental health. The remainder of the week passed with growing clarity about her preferred path forward. The liaison office representatives proved knowledgeable about the challenges faced by operators transitioning to civilian roles, and their proposed arrangement provided flexibility and protection that neither the DIA nor Marine Corps' options offered. Sarah's decision crystallized during a quiet moment in the maintenance bay while she worked on a particularly complex rifle modification. The precision required for the technical work reminded her that her capabilities could serve constructive purposes without crossing moral lines she was no longer willing to cross. The same hands that had once taken lives could now preserve them by ensuring that others had better tools and training. Her announcement to Commander Hayes on Friday morning was met with understanding and support that reflected the respect she had earned throughout the base during her 4 years of exceptional service. Hayes expressed genuine satisfaction that Sarah had found a path forward that honored both her capabilities and her concerns. The transition arrangement would allow Sarah to continue her maintenance responsibilities at Coronado while taking on consulting projects that utilized her operational expertise. The dual role provided stability and continuity while opening doors to contribution that might help other operators avoid the moral complexities that had driven her from active service. Lieutenant Rodriguez was among the first to congratulate Sarah on her decision, expressing genuine happiness that the base would retain access to her expertise while she pursued opportunities that better matched her exceptional capabilities. The young officer's enthusiasm reflected broader sentiment throughout Building 14 that Sarah's talents deserved wider application. Even Webb approached her with sincere congratulations, his respect for her decision evident in his manner. Their relationship had evolved from antagonistic to professionally respectful to something approaching friendship, demonstrating how revelation of hidden capabilities could transform relationships in positive directions. Master Chief Sullivan's satisfaction with the outcome was obvious in his expression as he reviewed the final arrangements Sarah had negotiated. His advocacy and support had been instrumental in creating options that might not have emerged without his involvement, and Sarah expressed genuine gratitude for his efforts on her behalf. The first consulting assignment arrived the following Monday, involving evaluation of advanced targeting systems for a Marine Corps training program. The work combined technical analysis with operational insight, allowing Sarah to contribute her expertise while maintaining clear boundaries about involvement levels. Her approach to the consultation reflected lessons learned from her transition out of active service, focusing on technical excellence while avoiding personal investment in outcomes beyond her control. The emotional distance that had initially seemed like withdrawal now served as professional protection that allowed her to contribute effectively without compromising her mental health. The success of her initial consulting work led to additional opportunities with different commands and agencies, each involving clearly defined projects with specific objectives and timelines. The variety prevented any single organization from dominating her schedule while providing intellectual stimulation that her maintenance work alone could not offer. Sarah found particular satisfaction in training development projects that incorporated lessons learned from operations like Desert Falcon. Her painful experience with the moral complexity of precision shooting could now serve constructive purposes by helping other operators recognize and navigate similar challenges more effectively. The curriculum she developed emphasized target identification protocols and civilian protection, measures that might have prevented the tragic outcomes that had driven her from active service. Each training module represented transformation of personal trauma into knowledge that could protect both operators and innocent civilians in future conflicts. Her reputation within the special operations community grew steadily as her consulting work demonstrated the practical value of her expertise. The combination of exceptional technical skills and hard-won wisdom about moral complexity made her a sought-after resource for organizations seeking to improve their training and operational effectiveness. But Sarah maintained careful control over her involvement levels, declining opportunities that threatened to cross boundaries she'd established for her own protection. The consulting arrangement provided flexibility to accept projects that aligned with her values while rejecting those that might compromise her carefully maintained balance. 6 months after her accidental exposure, Sarah had successfully constructed a new professional identity that honored both her exceptional capabilities and her personal limitations. The simple maintenance worker who polished rifles had evolved into a respected consultant whose expertise helped shape the training and equipment of future warriors. Her apartment gradually reflected this evolution, with technical manuals and training materials appearing alongside the functional furniture that had previously defined her living space. The change represented integration of her professional and personal identities rather than the strict separation she had maintained during her years of anonymity. The tattoo that had remained hidden for so long now served as a reminder of lessons learned rather than shame to be concealed. The 27 hash marks still carried emotional weight, but that weight was now balanced by knowledge that her experience could prevent similar tragedies for others facing comparable situations. Webb had become an unexpected ally in her transition, connecting her with opportunities and providing references that enhanced her credibility within the contractor community. Their relationship demonstrated how initial antagonism could evolve into mutual respect when people were willing to acknowledge their mistakes and growth. Lieutenant Rodriguez continued to seek Sarah's advice on professional development, benefiting from insights that combined technical expertise with understanding of the personal challenges that came with special operations careers. Their mentoring relationship represented the kind of constructive engagement that Sarah had hoped to achieve through her consulting work. Master Chief Sullivan remained a valued advisor and friend, his support during her transition having established trust that extended beyond professional relationships. His understanding of the challenges she faced provided perspective that helped her navigate decisions about future opportunities and involvement levels. The liaison office arrangement had proven even more effective than originally anticipated, providing administrative support and boundary protection that allowed Sarah to focus on the technical and educational aspects of her work without worrying about mission creep or unwanted pressure from client organizations. Her success in the consulting role had attracted attention from academic institutions seeking expertise for their military science programs, offering additional opportunities that aligned with her preference for educational rather than operational applications of her capabilities. The prospect of formal teaching positions represented potential long-term career paths that could provide stability and purpose. As Sarah reflected on the changes that had transformed her life since that accidental moment of exposure, she recognized that the revelation of her hidden capabilities had ultimately created opportunities for service that better matched her values and psychological needs than either complete anonymity or return to active combat roles. The precision that had once ended lives now served to preserve them through better training, improved equipment, and enhanced understanding of the moral complexities that elite operators faced in challenging environments. Her consulting work represented successful transformation of traumatic experience into constructive expertise that benefited others while protecting her own mental health. The simple woman who had polished rifles in silence had found her voice as an educator and advisor whose hard-won wisdom helped shape the next generation of warriors. The tattoo that had accidentally revealed her past had become the catalyst for a future that honored both her exceptional capabilities and her deeply held values about the proper application of lethal skills. Sarah Martinez had discovered that true redemption lay not in hiding from her capabilities, but in finding ways to use them that aligned with her conscience and contributed to purposes larger than personal protection. The maintenance bay where she had sought refuge had become the launching point for a career that balanced service with self-care, expertise with wisdom, and professional excellence with personal peace. 2 years had passed since Sarah Martinez's accidental exposure transformed her from an invisible maintenance worker into one of the most respected tactical consultants in the special operations community. The small apartment near Coronado had been replaced by a modest house in the hills overlooking San Diego Bay, its home office filled with technical manuals, training materials, and commendations from various military commands acknowledging her contributions to operator safety and effectiveness. The morning routine that had once centered around arriving before dawn to polish rifles now involved reviewing project proposals from organizations across the Department of Defense, each seeking her expertise for programs designed to enhance precision capabilities while minimizing civilian casualties. Her calendar balanced consulting work with her continued part-time role at Building 14, maintaining connection to the place where her transformation had begun. Sarah stood in her home office reviewing a particularly complex proposal from Naval Special Warfare Command, a comprehensive training program that would incorporate lessons learned from operations, like Desert Falcon, in the standard curriculum for future operators. The project represented exactly the kind of work she had hoped to accomplish through her consulting arrangements, transforming painful personal experience into educational content that might prevent similar tragedies. The proposal requested her to lead development of advanced target identification protocols, drawing on her operational experience to create training scenarios that emphasized distinction between combatants and non-combatants in complex environments. The work would require travel to various training facilities and extensive collaboration with instructional staff, but it offered opportunity to influence how the next generation of snipers approached morally complex situations. Her telephone rang, interrupting her review with a call from Master Chief Sullivan, whose voice carried excitement that suggested significant news. Their relationship had evolved into genuine friendship over the past 2 years, built on mutual respect and shared understanding of the challenges facing operators transitioning between different forms of service. "Martinez, I have something I think you will want to hear," Sullivan said without preamble. "The Commandant of the Marine Corps wants to meet with you personally about a program that could have major impact on special operations training across all service branches." The call represented recognition at the highest levels of military leadership, acknowledging that Sarah's expertise had gained attention far beyond the special operations community. The prospect of influence at such senior levels was both flattering and slightly intimidating, suggesting opportunities that could shape military training doctrine for years to come. "What kind of program are we discussing, Master Chief?" she asked, curious about initiatives that would warrant attention from 4-star leadership. "Inter-service precision shooting doctrine that incorporates psychological and ethical training alongside technical instruction," Sullivan explained. "They want to establish Sarah Martinez protocols as standard curriculum across all military sniper schools." The idea of having training protocols named after her created mixed emotions, representing both professional achievement and permanent association with the traumatic experiences that had driven her expertise. But the potential impact on operator preparation and civilian protection made the recognition worthwhile despite personal discomfort. When would this meeting take place? She asked, already beginning to calculate the implications of such high-level involvement. Next week at the Pentagon, if you are available, Sullivan replied. They want to discuss not just curriculum development, but potential establishment of a new training facility that would serve as the center of excellence for ethical precision shooting instruction. The scope of the proposal exceeded anything Sarah had previously considered, representing institutional commitment to the principles she had been advocating through her consulting work. The establishment of a dedicated facility would provide permanent home for training that emphasized moral complexity alongside technical proficiency. I will need to review my current commitments, but this sounds like an opportunity that aligns perfectly with my goals, she said thoughtfully. There's one more thing, Sullivan added, his tone becoming more serious. They also want to discuss the possibility of commissioning you as a civilian instructor with rank equivalent to full colonel, which would provide you with additional authority and resources for program development. The offer of equivalent rank represented significant recognition of her contributions while maintaining her civilian status and the boundary protections that had become essential to her well-being. The position would provide influence and resources without requiring return to active military service or operational deployments. That is definitely something I would need to consider carefully, Sarah replied, understanding that such positions carried responsibilities and visibility that would permanently change her professional profile. Of course, Sullivan agreed, but I wanted you to know that your work has gained attention at the highest levels, and there are people who believe your expertise could revolutionize how we prepare operators for the moral challenges they face in modern conflicts. The call concluded with arrangements for the Pentagon meeting, but Sarah found herself wrestling with the implications of such recognition and responsibility. The simple maintenance worker who had sought anonymity had become someone whose expertise was being sought to reshape military training doctrine across multiple service branches. Her afternoon was interrupted by an unexpected visitor, as Webb appeared at her front door carrying a bottle of wine and wearing civilian clothes that suggested this was a social rather than professional call. Their relationship had continued to evolve over the past 2 years, growing from professional respect into genuine friendship, built on shared understanding of military service challenges. Heard about the Pentagon invitation, Webb said as she welcomed him inside. Thought this might be worth celebrating, even if you have not made your decision yet. They settled on her back patio overlooking the bay, the California sunset providing a peaceful backdrop for conversation about opportunities that could define the remainder of Sarah's career. Webb's perspective as someone who had witnessed her transformation from the beginning provided valuable insight into the significance of the recognition she was receiving. You know, when I first met you in that maintenance bay, I never imagined we would be sitting here discussing your meeting with the Commandant of the Marine Corps, Webb said with genuine amazement. The journey you have traveled over the past 2 years has been remarkable to witness. Sarah considered his words while watching the last light fade over San Diego Bay, reflecting on the path that had brought her from anonymous maintenance work to national recognition for her expertise. The transformation had been gradual but profound, reshaping not just her professional identity, but her understanding of how traumatic experiences could be transformed into constructive service. Sometimes I wonder if I would have ever found this path without that accidental exposure, she mused. 4 years of hiding might have stretched into a lifetime if circumstances had not forced me to confront my capabilities and find better ways to use them. Maybe that is the point, Webb suggested. Maybe we hide from our capabilities when we should be finding ways to use them that align with our values instead of abandoning them entirely. The observation carried wisdom that extended beyond Sarah's specific situation to broader questions about how people with exceptional Abilities balanced personal protection with service to others. Her journey had demonstrated that the choice between hiding and harmful application was false, with constructive alternatives available for those willing to seek them. Their conversation continued as they discussed the Pentagon opportunity and its potential implications for Sarah's future. Webb's support and encouragement reflected the genuine friendship that had developed between two people whose initial meeting had been marked by hostility and misunderstanding. The following week brought Sarah to Washington for meetings that would determine the trajectory of her consulting career. The Pentagon's imposing corridors carried the weight of decisions that shaped global military policy, and Sarah found herself walking through hallways where her expertise was being considered for institutional adoption across all service branches. The meeting with the Commandant exceeded her expectations in both scope and substance. General Patricia Morrison, the first woman to hold the position, demonstrated deep understanding of the challenges facing modern operators and genuine appreciation for Sarah's unique perspective on balancing tactical excellence with ethical responsibility. Ms. Martinez, your work over the past 2 years has generated significant attention throughout the special operations community, Morrison began. The training protocols you have developed have shown measurable improvement in operator decision-making under stress conditions while maintaining tactical effectiveness. Sarah appreciated the recognition while remaining focused on the practical applications of her work rather than personal accolades. The General's emphasis on measurable results suggested that institutional adoption would be based on proven effectiveness rather than theoretical appeal. Thank you, General. The goal has always been to help operators avoid the moral complexities that can result from insufficient preparation for the ethical challenges they face in complex environments, Sarah replied. That is exactly why we want to establish the Martinez Center for Ethical Precision Shooting, Morrison continued. A facility dedicated to training that combines technical excellence with moral preparation, serving as the standard for all military sniper programs. The proposal represented institutional commitment to principles that Sarah had advocated through her consulting work, providing permanent home for training that emphasized the human elements of precision shooting alongside technical proficiency. The center would ensure that future operators received comprehensive preparation for both tactical and ethical challenges. The General outlined plans for a state-of-the-art facility that would include advanced simulation technology, classroom spaces for ethical instruction, and residential areas for extended training programs. The center would serve operators from all service branches while developing doctrine that could be adopted by allied nations facing similar challenges. We would want you to serve as the founding director with civilian rank equivalent to full colonel and complete authority over curriculum development and instructional staff selection, Morrison explained. The position would provide you with resources and influence to shape how we prepare precision shooters for the next generation of conflicts. The offer represented culmination of Sarah's transition from anonymous maintenance worker to recognized expert whose experience could influence military training at the highest levels. The opportunity to establish lasting institutional change aligned perfectly with her goals of transforming personal trauma into constructive service. General, I am honored by the offer and excited about the potential impact such a center could have on operator preparation. Sarah responded carefully. I would want to ensure that the curriculum maintains focus on ethical development alongside technical training, with clear emphasis on civilian protection and moral decision-making under stress. Absolutely, Morrison agreed. That is precisely why your leadership is essential to the program's success. Your unique combination of operational experience and moral awareness makes you the ideal person to establish the standards and culture for this type of training. The meeting concluded with Sarah accepting the position, understanding that her decision would reshape the remainder of her career while providing opportunity to influence military training doctrine for decades to come. The simple woman who had polished rifles had become someone whose expertise would help shape how future warriors approached the moral complexities of modern warfare. The establishment of the Martinez Center required months of planning and construction, but Sarah found the work deeply satisfying as she developed curriculum that incorporated lessons learned from her own painful experience. Each training module reflected her understanding that technical proficiency without moral preparation could lead to tragic outcomes that haunted operators long after their service ended. The center's first class of students included operators from all service branches, each bringing their own perspectives and challenges to training that emphasized ethical decision-making alongside precision shooting. Sarah's teaching style combined technical instruction with case study analysis that helped students understand the human consequences of their tactical decisions. Her opening address to the inaugural class reflected the journey that had brought her to this position, acknowledging the personal costs of operational experience, while emphasizing the importance of learning from those experiences to serve others more effectively. You are here because you have demonstrated exceptional technical abilities in precision shooting, Sarah began, addressing 36 operators representing the elite of their respective services. But technical ability alone is insufficient preparation for the moral complexities you will face in operational environments. She gestured toward the advanced training facilities that surrounded them, equipment designed to simulate the stress and complexity of real-world shooting scenarios while incorporating ethical decision-making into every exercise. This center exists because some of us learned these lessons the hard way, through experiences that taught us the difference between tactical success and moral victory, she continued. Your training here will prepare you to achieve both, ensuring that your exceptional capabilities serve purposes that you can live with long after your operational careers end. The students listened with the focused attention that elite operators brought to instruction that could determine their success and survival in future missions. Sarah's reputation within the special operations community ensured that her words carried weight beyond mere institutional authority. Over the following months, the Martinez Center established itself as the premier facility for precision shooting instruction that incorporated ethical training alongside technical development. The combination of advanced simulation technology with comprehensive moral education created graduates who demonstrated both exceptional tactical abilities and sophisticated understanding of the human implications of their actions. Sarah's work at the center attracted international attention, with allied nations requesting assistance in developing similar programs for their own special operations forces. The principles she had developed based on her personal experience were proving applicable across different military cultures and operational environments. The success of the center validated Sarah's belief that traumatic experiences could be transformed into constructive service when approached with appropriate support and institutional commitment. Her journey from anonymous maintenance worker to director of a center that bore her name demonstrated the potential for personal growth and professional contribution even after devastating setbacks. As she stood in her office overlooking the training ranges where future operators learned to balance tactical excellence with moral responsibility, Sarah reflected on the path that had brought her to this position. The tattoo that had accidentally revealed her capabilities now served as a reminder of lessons learned and wisdom gained through painful experience. The 27 hash marks remained on her forearm, visible reminders of lives taken in service of tactical objectives that had proven morally complex. But they were now balanced by the knowledge that her experience was helping prepare hundreds of operators to make better decisions in similar situations, potentially preventing future tragedies through improved training and moral preparation. The simple woman who had polished rifles in silence for 4 years had found her voice as an educator and leader, whose expertise influenced military doctrine at the highest levels. Her transformation demonstrated that redemption was possible, even after the most traumatic experiences. when individuals found ways to serve others while honoring their own moral boundaries and psychological needs. Sarah Martinez had discovered that true service sometimes required stepping into visibility rather than seeking anonymity, using exceptional capabilities to benefit others, while maintaining the personal boundaries necessary for continued well-being. The maintenance bay where she had sought refuge had become the starting point for a career that balanced professional excellence with personal peace, expertise with wisdom, and tactical proficiency with moral clarity. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.